Hi everybody, my name's John Spruce. Welcome to the first meetup of the Agile Leadership and Business Agility Meetup by Agile Centre of 2021. It's already been a bit of a year and it's only the 6th of January. We have some great stuff to talk to you about today. We've invited to talk with us Bill Joyner, who is going to introduce himself better than I could, but I've known Bill for a little while. We've worked on Business Agility Leadership 360, which he's going to be talking about today, the assessment and the framework. His book, Leadership Agility, is an amazing book and is something that is almost a bit of a Bible on how to look at the ways of helping people understand where they currently are from a leadership style and where they can get to. I'm not going to spoil too many surprises or talk up for Bill anyway. I'm going to be recording this and we'll probably be getting this together for the next couple of days to allow for people to see this who didn't get a chance to see it. It'll be on our YouTube channel and on our website as well. So just to let you know that this will be recorded. Also, it's about an hour long in total, so we'll be finishing at 7:30 UK time. I'll be capturing questions in the chat in Zoom. So I'll just bring up a quick note here and say any questions here. And I'll capture them throughout. There'll be about a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of this call, at the end of this webinar. And Bill will be able to answer any questions for you then as well. So any questions, put it in the chat. I'll capture them as we go, and we'll give you a quarter of an hour at the end just to have a quick chat. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Bill Joyner, and his talk is called Bringing Leadership Agility to Agile, which is probably a very pertinent time to do that. So I'm going to spotlight Bill, and off we go. Thank you, Bill.
All right, thanks, John, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you, and I want to thank my friends at the Agile Center for the invite. As John said, but he and one of the other partners is using the Leadership Agility 360, and I think the other might be interested in doing that as well. So that's one connection that we have. Let me share my screen, and I'll start moving through this presentation. I want to give you a sense of the highlights of the Leadership Agility framework that came out of 5 years of research, and tell a couple of stories that illustrate what it's like to move to new levels of agility according to this framework, and also let you know how you can learn to use the framework in your coaching. So let me share my screen. Okay, you can see that, right? Okay, so that's, as John said, that's the title of the talk. You know, I think we're all familiar with this term VUCA, and it's one way of describing the environment, the business environment that we're dealing with today. Somebody the other day told me they thought this COVID development is probably like VUCA on steroids. But I want to highlight a couple of, well, first of all, and I think we all know that the current environment is calling out almost desperately for agile leadership. So what does that really look like, and how can we help our clients develop a greater agility? What I'll be talking about this evening comes out of the Leadership Agility book, as well as all of the work that we've done with leaders in the meantime. Essentially, the book had these three questions behind it. First of all, how do highly agile leaders think? How do they act? And how do you develop greater agility? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the business payoff for leadership agility, what I consider the core practice of leadership agility. So to me, agile leadership requires more than adopting a mindset. As important as that is, it's also has a core practice that You can apply in a variety of different ways, including the 3 levels of agility that I will walk you through. And then things that you could do to learn to use this framework. So back to the VUCA environment, I believe that there are 2 deep global trends that are underlying this environment. First one, as we know, everything's moving very rapidly. The mind-boggling thing to me about it is that the pace of change is accelerating. So as much as we and the organizations we work with are trying to catch up with the current pace of change, we know for virtual certainty that that pace of change is going to keep getting faster. So that's one big need for leadership agility. And the other has to do with everything becoming more interconnected. So the bullets on this slide are kind of the macro version of that. But if we think about the companies we work in and with, I think we see that interconnections within companies are have become extremely important. So, breaking down silos and moving things through the organization sort of laterally has become a huge priority. You can take what I just said and map it onto this graph. So, and tell a little bit of a simplified story about how the environment has evolved. So, once upon a time, pace of change and the degree of interdependence in the business environment was relatively low. And then roughly the last half of the last century, we entered into an era of moderate change and complexity, requiring strategic planning for the first time, for example. Now, of course, we're in this unprecedented environment where pace of change is off the charts and level of complexity is off the charts. And it really is, to use an overused word, unprecedented. Now, just a couple of things I want to share with you about some additional research that I did after the book with some partners. First of all, there are 2 slides here. The first one has to do with pulling together a disparate set of research on organizations of all kinds. And this is research not so much from the Agile community. I think it's just a confirmation of what we're doing, but it's from people who study organizations, whether the data came in through case studies or academic studies or a variety of other approaches. They all have arrived at the same conclusion, which is the more agile an organization, meaning the better it is at dealing with the environment that I just described, the better the business performance is. And that's using just traditional metrics for business performance. So that's a real confirmation, I think, of what we're all trying to do. I wanted to add that. I know. So in order to create an Agile organization, of course, the early days of Agile was very focused on methods and not necessarily fully capturing the philosophy and the mindset that was needed. And over time, I think everybody's got pretty hip to the fact that, there's also Agile structure, which has something to do with Agile moving beyond software development into the rest of the organization. So how do you structure an organization in such a way that it fosters greater agility? But then there's this whole other big sort of softer, mushy piece that we're going to try to make much more clear, having to do with leadership and culture. And I think the last, 4 years or so, as I've spoken at Agile conferences and so on, everybody seems to be very much aware of the central importance of Agile leadership and creating a culture that really fosters agility. Now, additional piece of research here, that this is the one we did with partners, He looked at the impact of the level of leadership agility using this framework that I'll be presenting here on organizational agility and on business performance. And what we found, there were two different studies. One was with a partner in the US and one was a partner in Europe. They both arrived at exactly the same conclusions, which were that those leadership cultures, by that I mean the part of the organizational culture that sets norms for what kinds of leadership is expected and rewarded in an organization. The leadership culture embodied a higher level of agility. That correlated with a higher level of organizational agility and, again, greater business performance. And of course, those with lower levels of agility found the opposite to be true. Okay, so that's sort of looking at things from an organizational perspective. If we come down to the individual leader and ask, well, what is this leadership agility thing really? I get the buzzword, but what does it really mean? At the core of it, as I mentioned earlier, is a practice. And I call this practice reflective action. So here's a way to think about it. It's sort of like a leader using a zoom lens. So much of the time, a leader is very focused in on what they're trying to accomplish as a leader. To exercise leadership agility means to be able to mentally step back from that. So let's say a leader is leading a meeting, and they want this meeting to be interactive and participative. They might step back as they're leading this meeting and notice that it's not really that, and maybe notice that they're taking too much of the airtime themselves. Whatever it may be, by gaining a broader and deeper perspective from that step back, from zooming out, you can notice things like that and take corrective action. What we found is that the most agile leaders can do this very rapidly and can do it almost in the moment. Less agile leaders tend to do this by reflecting back on something that recently happened and learning from that, and then doing something different. And even less agile leaders just don't tend to do this much. So that's the core practice. One of the key elements in the leadership agility framework, and the one I want to really focus on the most with you this evening, is the levels of agility. And I'm superimposing this on the chart that I presented a minute ago, because what we found was these levels, we call expert, achiever, and catalyst levels of agility. The expert leaders that we studied and worked with were pretty good at dealing with taking leadership if the pace of change was low and the degree of interdependence, for example, the need to work with stakeholders, was also low. Now, about 55% of leaders lead in that way, and I'll describe in a minute what that means. Achiever leaders are very effective. They're more strategic. Expert leaders are more tactical. Achiever leaders can be very effective in environments, as I said, like we had in the last half of the last century. And it's really been a combination of expert and achiever leadership that for many, many, many years has taken organizations to where they've gotten at this point. But now with this new environment, there's a need for what I call catalyst leadership. Now, unfortunately, there's only roughly 10% of leaders who can reliably act from this level of agility. So I think in some ways, this just puts some numbers on what we already experience and sense, informally about kind of where are our leaders relative to where they need to be. And one of the nice things about this framework is that it provides ways to help us. Let's just say we're working with we're coaching a particular individual. To know, is this person beginning from the expert level? Are they beginning from the achiever level? Do they have a foothold in catalyst? Because knowing these things make a big difference in how we go about coaching them. and helping them move to their next level. Now, the levels of agility, I'm gonna go a little bit esoteric on you here, but just want to give you a little bit of the behind the scenes. This framework is really based on a field called stage development psychology, which has mapped out the stages by which individuals become more complex in their thinking, more emotionally intelligent. And initially they had mapped out in the first half of the last century, they mapped out the, how do infants grow and become adults? And there were 4 key stages involved in that, and they were very well researched. And then they began to do the adult levels. Now, the ones that are really, really relevant to the organizations that we work with are the 3 that I mentioned a minute ago. There are some people who have developed to later stages, and you can read about them in the book. I think they're very inspiring stories. But they're sort of, these people are very rare and considerably beyond where our clients are. So our focus at ChangeWise has been to focus on these 3 levels. Now, another thing I want to make clear is when we talk about levels of agility, we're not talking about the same thing as personality types or leadership styles, where you want to have, hey, it's great if we have a full array of different kinds of types and styles on our executive team, because that means we're going to have a diversity of thought. There's actually no correlation between any personality type or leadership style and a level of agility. You find all of them at every level. So it's just a very different construct. Another concept that's important here is the distinction between horizontal development and vertical development. Vertical development is a term that's being used for moving to new stages in your own personal development, and in this framework also includes moving through different levels of agility. Horizontal development, by contrast, is the usual form of development where leaders are learning new competencies, but they're not developing their internal capacities. So that's fine if your stage of development already matches the competencies that you need to lead from. But now with this need to move to more leaders to the catalyst level, unless there's attention to the development of the internal capacities, cognitive and emotional, as well as a new repertoire of leadership practices, very unlikely to stick. And we found that most 360s focus only on horizontal development. There's very, very little out there that even claims to help you to assess where people are in terms of their vertical development. Our approach is to do both, vertical and horizontal simultaneously. So inner development and skill development at the same time. So let me come back to these agility levels, and I want to put a little meat on the bones and let you know, what is the expert level? What does that look like, et cetera. So a couple of things I'm going to cover when I describe each level. One is an implicit assumption that leaders have at that level about what leadership is. And it's not necessarily what they would say if you interviewed them, but it's what you could legitimately infer from their behavior. So at the expert level, the assumption is, okay, I'm leading if people are respecting and following me because I have the authority and because I have the expertise. And then I want to describe what this level of agility is like in 3 different, what I call action arenas: leading organizational change, leading teams, and what I call pivotal conversations. So at the expert level, to the extent that you're leading change, it is in a tactical manner, making incremental improvements. And with experts tend not to interact much with their stakeholders as they're trying to change things. Expert team leadership is, the word team there is somewhat of a misnomer because experts don't really create true teams. It's more of a one-on-one relationship. And some people call this hub and spoke, where the leader is the hub and everything has to go through that person. All decisions, you know, it's a non-empowering approach to team leadership. And pivotal conversations, these are conversations where two people have different views, but they have to resolve them. What we find is that expert leaders tend to be either highly assertive in these conversations, kind of overpower the other person to resolve the conflict, or accommodative, meaning they will at least outwardly accede to the other person's, what the other person wants to do. The key here is that it tends to be very either or and somewhat extreme in the approaches. And I flip back and forth between the two, but it's kind of a polarity as opposed to an integrated approach to pivotal conversations. So that's the expert approach. As I said, actually, you know, according to our research, more leaders are at this level of agility than any other, which gives us a lot of things to work on. So achiever leadership, by contrast, the assumption is that, hey, leadership is about motivating people. You know, you need to make it challenging for people and satisfying for them to contribute, not just to get the task done, which is kind of the focus of the expert, but to contribute to larger strategic objectives. Leading change at the achiever level is a strategic approach, and the focus is very much on outcomes. This is the ultimate for the achiever, is to get those strategic outcomes achieved, which makes them a little more flexible in terms of how to achieve it. And the approach here, of course, is to, you know, you scan the environment, you see what's going on now, what's emerging, and you come up with a new strategy for that. But it tends to be episodic as opposed to a continual change approach. And the other big difference between the achiever and the expert and the achiever when it comes to leading change is that they really go after buy-in from stakeholders. Whether they use more of a selling approach or inclusive approach, they realize that, hey, I can't do this by myself. I've got to motivate other people, and getting stakeholder buy-in is a key part of that. Now, team leadership, now I'm trying to create a genuine team, and I will hold meetings with my direct reports where we discuss things as a team. You know, could be strategic, could be operational issues, but now I'm getting my team engaged. And finally, at the achiever level is the pivotal conversations. And here what we find is that most achievers are either primarily assertive, a slight majority, or primarily accommodative, but they can also sort of use somewhat of the other style to balance to some degree the way they handle pivotal conversations. Now, the catalyst leadership that is sort of an emerging kind of leadership that's very much needed today. The assumption about leadership is that it is about creating and articulating and inspiring vision. And I'll tell you in a minute how that vision differs from an achiever vision, but also very importantly to empower others and develop others to realize the vision. In leading organizational change, catalyst leaders, and this was true for all that we studied and worked with, do something that one of them called aiming through the target. And what he meant by that was, he said, you know, in karate and archery, they teach you to do that. And I said, well, okay, now how does that apply to what you're doing? He says, well, the target is, in this particular case, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this guy in a minute, he had to rapidly increase the share price of his company. But through the target was to create a capacity in his organization that could meet any strategic challenge. So here's a realization that with the environment being so unpredictable, obviously you can't create a 10-year strategic plan. It'll be, you'll have to throw it away in a few months. But what you can do is develop capacities in the organization that allows it to be really good at sensing and responding to the environment as it emerges. So what he's talking about here is creating an agile organization and putting particular emphasis on the organizational culture. As important as methods and structures are, these leaders realize that their leadership and the culture of the organization is absolutely key to creating an agile organization, and they set out to do that. But they don't just, like some leaders would, and these are more achiever type leaders, would bring in their head of HR and say, hey, we need a culture change program. I want you to roll one out while we run the business. Catalyst leaders say, no, we're going to draw on HR as needed, but what we're going to do is, first of all, create the kind of culture we want in this company on this team. And the kind of culture that these Catalyst leaders are in the process of creating is one that's very participative, empowered, collaborative, constructive straight talk. And they're saying, or what they're doing is spending some time first with their own team and realizing, of course, that this change begins with them. If they can't lead in this way and create this kind of team, how can they expect their organization to do this? And of course, this has a lot of benefits because it not only makes them much more credible in the change they're trying to make in the organization, it creates a much more cohesive team that can be much more effective in leading change. And finally, in pivotal conversations, what we see with Catalyst leaders is that they're really good at creating dialogue because they're very adept at expressing their own views and persuading others, but they're equally adept at inquiring into other perspectives, taking those perspectives seriously. They may, sometimes they change their mind, sometimes they don't, but they're actively engaging with other perspectives and testing their own views. So that's kind of a quick whirlwind tour of the 3 levels. A couple of things I want to say about how to think about, this is a different way of thinking about leadership development because of the vertical development dimension. So if you're using this, if you're thinking about the organization you work for or with, a couple of things are good to keep in mind. First of all, a person's level of agility can vary throughout the day. Sometimes that's because it needs to, because you need to zoom in more or you need to zoom out more for certain activities. But we also found that leaders, their ability to vary is not terribly great from their center of gravity. So if they're mainly an achiever leader, they might be able to do a little bit of Catalyst and do other things at the expert level, but fundamentally they're operating at the achiever level. Some people ask, perhaps thinking of people they've known, or leaders they've known that they can't imagine developing through these levels. Can everybody really develop through these levels? And what we found over the past 10 years is absolutely, it takes a couple of conditions. They need to be challenged and supported. So they have to have that, growth mindset or develop that, and coaching and other kinds of support activities can make a huge difference. Another important point here is that as you move through these levels, you retain the capacities that you develop at previous levels. So if you develop fully into the Catalyst level, you're still able to downshift into strategic approaches and even into tactical approaches. So the way that we think about this is not that, okay, everybody has to become a catalyst and you have to do everything at a catalyst level. It wouldn't be so bad for everybody to become a catalyst, but the reason is that fully developed catalyst leaders can operate at any of these three levels as the situation requires. So we found that the leaders that we present this framework with and the workshops that we do really like this idea there's not one right way to do something all the time, because they know that's not true. They like the idea that you need to sort of calibrate to different situations. And so those are key points I wanted to stress. Now, I want to just tell a couple of quick stories to kind of bring this. This is all still somewhat conceptual. I want to talk about a client who started at the expert level and developed into and maybe a little bit beyond the achiever level. So this happened to be somebody who had just been promoted into a position called the VP of Organizational Excellence for a large hospital system. It really meant that he was kind of, his group played a consulting role to the medical practices and other entities in this large system. Now, we used the Leadership Agility 360 with the executive team, and his showed, to just way simplify the results, that he was what I would call maxed out at the expert level. He was a great expert. And one of his main presenting issues when we first started talking was that, here I've just been promoted to the executive ranks. I need to be able to be more strategic, but honestly, I have no time for that. He was really in a quandary as to what to do about it. Now, because he was leading at the expert level, his approach to his team leadership was this hub and spoke approach that was used before. So, he ran what I call searchlight meetings, where you go around the room. This was before COVID, and you get a report in from each person, and you communicate information to your team about that they need to know about what's going on at the executive level, right? Those were the meetings. Now, what he pretty quickly realized through the coaching was, oh, this is the main reason that I don't have time to be strategic. I'm eating up all kinds of time in the way I'm dealing with my team. If I took a more strategic approach to leading my team, and I could take I would have more time to do other things. So that's what he began to do. And I'll just sort of flash to the end of the story. There's a couple of things that I want to highlight. There's more to it than this, but this will suffice, I think. So one thing he began to do was really practice reflective action. He was a guy who kind of operated on his gut quite a lot. And so to do this reflective action process on a much more frequent basis really allowed him to use more of his intelligence. He was actually capable of strategic thinking, but he wasn't using it in his leadership. So he wound up calling it the pause, what I call reflective action. And I remember asking him one time, tell me about the pause. What goes through your mind? He said, well, okay, the other day I was walking down the hall, I was getting ready to lead this meeting. In typical fashion, I hadn't really prepared much for it. And so I just let myself pause mentally as I was walking down the hall. I said, well, then what happened? He said, well, I began to have things come to my mind, like, what's the outcome I want from this meeting? Now, interesting, if you remember, outcome orientation is a key aspect of achiever leadership. Experts would focus on how to do the meeting. Achievers would begin with, what do I want the end game to be in this meeting, and work backwards from there. So that pause put him into this reflective space where he was able to ask these achiever type questions and act on them. And that's just one example of, many times that he did this. And then he also, with his team, he shifted into a team problem solving approach. So anything that could affect most or all of the team, he would put on the agenda and they would discuss it as a team. That was a new approach for them. And over time, he got to the place where he could actually go into, frame one of these meetings with his team. Okay, here's the issue. I'm going to leave and have a meeting with one of my peers and discuss some strategic issues. I want you guys to come up with a recommendation for how to solve this. And they had done enough team problem solving with him that they could now do this on their own. So, big shift in the way he led his team and the way he distributed his time to become more strategic. And he was also doing more delegation and coaching of his direct reports. Another story, this one has to do with achiever to catalyst, and is the person I mentioned earlier. But what happened was, in this company, the guy who was leading it, this was a company that was in a very competitive market, very margin sensitive, very hard to distinguish your company from anybody else's. And their revenues were going down. He was laying people in several rounds of layoffs. They were struggling. And he was replaced. He was an achiever leader. He did the kinds of things a lot of achievers do. The person he was replaced with, I think unbeknownst to those who were doing the replacing, turns out to be a catalyst leader. And so what he did was he said, okay, yeah, we have sort of an emergency here. We have to raise our, they had just become public, got to raise our share price right away. But here's my vision. We're going to become the best regional in North America, and we're going to be benchmarked by other companies, not just in our industry, but in other industries, not just for what we do strategically, but for what we do operationally. And he put together what he called the breakout strategy process that I facilitated with a colleague. 10 idea factories. These were groups of 20 employees all over Canada that brainstormed breakthrough ideas for the company. He brought in outside stakeholders, even including a few environmentalists to throw their ideas in. And then he asked me to facilitate a 2-day session with the executive team to synthesize all this into strategy ideas. Well, again, bottom line, what happened from this process, which was a catalyst type process, right? Because of the type of vision, the degree of engagement of stakeholders, and the use of creative thinking techniques in the strategy process, resulted in a more agile organization with a much stronger people strategy. And the way it was implemented was rather remarkable, and the kind of thing that we see catalyst leaders do, which was there was just a lot of communication. They would have meetings between one level of the organization and the next, where they would be both holding people accountable for making the changes that were needed, but also getting feedback and upward feedback from those levels up into the organization. So there was a remarkable degree of alignment. And look at where they were 3 years later. They had now entered an era where the company was growing rapidly. Each year, the company was making 31 million more than it was. This is a mid-sized company. And their expenses were down 40 million each year. And in the stock market, they went from, not being recommended to being highly recommended. So I think this is a pretty good illustration of the difference it can make to have a catalyst leader in a position like this, as opposed to an achiever leader. So as I'm wrapping up the presentation portion, I just want to, excuse me. For those of you who are curious about this framework and thinking, maybe this would be a good thing for me to use in my practice, we have two things I want to tell you about. First of all, our next Leadership Agility 360 workshop that both John and Kareem have attended will be coming up, just in a few weeks. If you happen to need ICF credits, you can get that. But if you're excuse me, if you think you might be interested, sorry. Please email me and I can get you a special discount if you email me by the end of the week. Okay, so that's the 360 workshop. I'm especially excited about this program, Leadership Agility Coaching, because we've taught this on and off over the past 10 years. And what we did when COVID hit was we put this online and we significantly upgraded the program. It's much richer than it was earlier. So just briefly, again, this is a situation where if you think you might be interested, let me know. And again, if you can let me know by Friday, I can get you some special discounting for this. We're just finishing up our first cohort for this particular design. And it takes you through some foundational learnings about the framework. And then it gives you very specific methods. For example, how do you help an achiever develop catalyst stakeholder agility or creative agility? There are 4 types of agility that I haven't even mentioned yet. So very specific methods and questions to use to help leaders develop from one level to another. And then we go into a coaching clinic where you bring in your own coaching situations and get feedback from the group. We tend to get very rich groups. There'll be a combination of Agile coaches and sort of regular leadership coaches from a variety of backgrounds and locations. So that's why I'm excited about this. And again, if you are interested, let me know. And now, I think we're just about on time for Q&A.
We are, and I do hope, Bill, that your cough is okay.
Yes, I will survive.
Okay, thank you for that. Questions as we went through. There's a few there.
Okay.
One from Ross Lewis, which is he can maybe explain a bit further, but I'll just read it out the question here.
Okay.
I'm curious to know why Bill decided to call this agile leadership rather than just leadership. These characteristics are already known in the management literature. I think it's just a bit of a question around why it was leadership agility, I suppose, instead of big A agile, maybe. Is there a difference, isn't there?
Yeah, well, when I was writing the book and doing the research, the book had a provisional title, but I knew it wasn't going to be the final title. And what I kept asking myself was, I was looking at it as people move through these developmental stages and develop the leadership repertoire that's consistent with the capacities that come with that. What's a way of describing the core of what's developing? And that's where I came up with agility. And at the time, I was not aware of the Agile movement, but it just seemed to be a great word to describe. I found that there were 8 dimensions on which people develop. I haven't gone into that in this presentation. And so I kept asking, what do they all have in common? Is there a term that captures it? And that's where I came up with it. I would not agree that this is all in the leadership literature. I think there's a little bit, there are leadership perspectives that touch on Catalyst, on aspects of Catalyst, but maybe I'm biased, but I don't think that there is another systematic description of what I call catalyst leadership. The other thing is, it's just, if we think of it as leadership and not leadership, we're missing the whole developmental dimension of this. And I think that's one of the unique perspectives that the leadership agility framework brings.
Okay, thank you. That's helped. I think that, yeah, Russell's come in and said great thanks in the chat as well. So that's great. Thank you. Another question we had from Laura, though she's left the meeting, unfortunately, she had to duck out. She said, just so I'm clear, how are you defining leader? And she said, sorry if this is a stupid question. I suppose, you know, when people are talking about leadership and leaders, it can be quite difficult sometimes, and there's a lot of kind of graying there. Is that? Could you give us a quick definition of what that means when you're applying it in this sense?
Yeah, well, that's a term that there's a lot of confusion, I think, around that. What's a leader? What's a manager?
Yeah. Does
leader mean you're an executive, or, you know? So, first of all, my main emphasis is on leadership as an action. You know, providing leadership, acting as a leader. So I think that's something you can do at any level of the organization. So this framework can be applied at any level of the organization. So, I have a very basic, I guess, definition of leadership, which is it's action you take to try to make something better. And that sort of encompasses a lot of different things. It encompasses all these different levels and other aspects of the framework. So I think anytime somebody is trying to take constructive action, I could be a team member and not a team leader, and exert a kind of leadership, right, in that team that can really make a difference. So when we coach, so I'm using it sort of loosely, I guess, when I say leaders who do this and that. Mainly I mean people who have official leadership responsibilities, but as we know, there's all kinds of informal leadership that people can provide.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. But yeah, I think we can all be leaders, right, in some way. And if we exert those kind of those behaviors, then in theory we're also kind of, we can be put on that continuum from experts to accountants, right? We have a couple of other questions here. One from Nicola Brown. From a practical standpoint, what's one thing you'd recommend that leaders can change in their approach to move forward through the levels?
Well, of course, it depends on where a person is, but where they're starting from, right? Because we certainly found that people who are at the expert level need to move through the achiever level to get to the catalyst level. Just as a preschooler doesn't suddenly enroll in middle school, you need to go through that developmental progression. I think the most powerful single practice is reflective action, which I've already talked about, but to find ways to regularly, to be conscious and intentional about what you're trying to do. Here's one application of that. You're getting ready to have what I call a pivotal conversation with somebody, not just a routine conversation, not an informational one, but something where you have different views you have to resolve. So prepare. What do you want to accomplish? What do you know about this person and what they need? What do you want to find out? And then have the conversation and then reflect on it. How did it go? If it wasn't entirely satisfactory, of course, you could say it's all the other person's fault. Or you could say, what could I have done differently? So that kind of, that involves growth mindset, involves reflective action, and it requires a bit of discipline. Sometimes I talk with clients about it in the Agile world it's almost like a little sprint. Right? You set an intention to do something, you do it, and then you retrospect. But most people are not used to doing that kind of thing on a really proactive, systematic way. Everybody is trying to get better and does some kind of reflective action, but to really be intentional about it. And of course, if you have a coach, then you almost have that's almost built in if you have a good coach, because that you're going to be reflecting with your coach, and you're going to be your coach is going to be helping you do that kind of reflective action on the things that are important to you.
Yeah. Reflection is such a key element to it, and such a key element of coaching as well, right? So
Yeah.
really, thank you for that, Bill. We've got a kind of two different people, but very similar questions. So I'll read them both out. It's one from Kate, one from Judith. We've been working to transform our organization into a more agile one for the past 18 months with significant success. What I'm finding, however, is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to plan and communicate with our other markets who are resistant to this change. Do you have any advice on how to influence other parts of our business who do have some control over the way we operate? And Judith's question is similar. It's like, what's the best way to start to promote these changes at an organizational level? So I think they're kind of linked a little bit, but what's the best way to sort of try and help spread it across the wider organization, these kind of approaches?
Well, the best way isn't always the most practical, the most possible, but the best way in my experience is you start at the top and you help those leaders develop their own leadership agility. Yeah, a little bit like what I was describing as the catalyst approach to organizational change. So we often, for that purpose, for example, we use our 360 for that purpose, so that everybody's kind of going through the same process, develops the same language, and commits to very specific practices coming out of it that show up in the real world. So, once you have that kind of role modeling, it becomes easier to move down through the organization. And in our case, we use, sometimes when we get below the top levels, we have another assessment tool called the Leadership Agility Accelerator, which is a self-assessment, which is, cheaper, faster way to get middle managers engaged in this process. So, you're trying to change philosophy, mindset, culture, and that's the most powerful way to do it. Sometimes you can't start at the top. Sometimes people at the top kind of take the attitude that, well, we wouldn't be at the top if we needed to learn anything more about leadership, which of course is, not true. But sometimes you need to work, you may need to work at a level that's lower down. Another approach is to take some important intact group and work with them extensively, not just with coaching, but with team development activities for them, so that they, it's like a pilot. And with the results that the pilot generates, then you can spread the word. That approach is take somebody who's excited about the idea and focus in on what they can do. So go for the early adopters, support those. Don't worry so much about people who are resisting, because the more adopters you have, the more people you have to deal with the resistance. So those are a couple of thoughts off the top of my head.
Really helpful. Thank you for that, Bill. And also those leaders at the top of the tree who believe they don't need any more leadership training or development or coaching are expert leaders in their own right? So it almost tells you something before.
Well, no, they could be expert or achiever, but you can still, yeah, you can still have that attitude.
Definitely. We've got a few minutes left, so we've got a question that's popped in from John O'Connell. I'm leading innovation to help change an organization from a transactional service delivery to transformational service delivery. Change in VUCA is tough for leaders who are comfortable with the status quo. Would you suggest executive boards sponsor or seed catalysts throughout their organizations to facilitate agility and change at pace, plus this empowerment of intent to act across all levels will support a delivery of vision. It's kind of, where do you see these catalysts to try and help that kind of wave of change that's needed to help move, I suppose?
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understood, John. What was it about the board and the catalysts? Could you say that again?
Would you suggest that the executive boards themselves sponsor the catalysts leaders throughout the business to facilitate that change at pace? So I suppose at this instance, it's like, where do we get those catalysts and where do we put them? I suppose it's asking a question about development as well as hiring as well, I suppose. But I think that's kind of the pace there. John, if you wanted to sort of unmute and maybe answer your question if you're still here.
Hi, John. Hi, Bill. Thanks for asking the question. Yeah, it's more around that you can have kind of catalyst leadership, and I kind of recognize it in myself. But if you haven't got sponsorship from your board, you can be quite lonely playing against a kind of a unit that's kind of comfortable doing what it does on a daily basis, not realizing it needs to change quite quickly. I'm thinking if the catalysts aren't sponsored by the executive board for change and to be disruptive in their very nature, you're on a bit of a hiding to nowhere. So I'm thinking that, do executive boards need to sort of, if they need to fundamentally realize they need to change because of VUCA, they need to make a direct action to put these catalysts in places to facilitate change. And also that ability to intend to act, because you mentioned about, the catalysts driving the vision, but if they don't empower people to act and take action, it isn't going to work. Yeah.
All right. Well, if they weren't empowering people, they wouldn't be real catalyst leaders. Yeah. Well, I don't personally have experience with board sponsorship of catalysts. Sounds like a good idea. The first question I would have is, how do you identify these people? And given that most boards are predominantly achiever level folks, how well will they understand this kind of leadership? So I think maybe maybe it's a matter of finding people who are inclined to use one or more catalyst type practices without necessarily labeling them catalysts, and saying, this is the kind of leadership that we need in our organization. And what are all the ways we can find to promote that? Like, let's make sure that we're telling stories about success stories about these leaders and what they've been able to accomplish and how they've been able to do it. I will say that if you read the book and the Catalyst chapter, what you'll see in there is a set of, I think, about 4 stories of catalyst leaders and what they were able to accomplish, none of whom were surrounded by any other catalysts and none of whom had any particular sponsorship by anyone. So in addition to whatever you might want to do with boards, I think just reading through that and seeing how are they able to do it. Now, one thing I will say, genuine catalyst leadership tends to be, for the most part, people who work for catalyst leaders like working for them because they're empowering, because they take their ideas seriously. So, that's one thing catalyst leaders have for them in terms of building support for what they're doing, is that certainly those who work for them can experience the benefits of it. And another thing is that catalyst leaders really need to operate on several levels at the same time. They have to still be able to do the strategic things an achiever can do and achieve the strategic objectives. But the difference is that while they're doing that, they're building a different kind of culture that's a more agile culture. So it's working on these 2 different levels simultaneously. So I don't know if any of that was helpful to you, John, but that's my take.
Really helpful, thank you. No, I think probably it's difficult from my perspective, from a catalyst, because I'm working in healthcare, which is highly regulated. So it's very much in that expert domain, but it knows it needs to change and it needs catalysts to sort of push forward the change. COVID has made digital hospital interventions online pace, and that catalyst just happened because of the VUCA environment. So yeah, no, thank you. It's very helpful.
Okay, sure.
And we're slightly over, so I appreciate everybody's who's stood behind a little bit. I've got a few things just to close out on, really. Thank you very much, Bill, for joining us today, all the way from the States. Your book is available online and to purchase from most good retailers, Leadership Agility.
Amazon in particular, yeah.
Yeah. And also you can visit changewise.biz to have a look at the upcoming courses that Bill offers and the team do, and also the assessments, which you can go into a bit more detail there and have a look at how you can actually get those assessments done once you've gone through the training there. So there's some really interesting stuff. If there's not been a question answered, I apologize, but please do reach out and we'll try and get that done for you. Bill's already shared his email address and he's more than happy to take your emails directly. This has been a great talk and I really appreciate it, Bill. We've got another talk coming up on the 24th of February with Tracy Sinclair, one of the board members of the ICF. So that would be a great one. Some more details coming out about that in the next few days. But until then, thank you very much, Bill, and have everybody else a great week. See you all soon.
Thanks, John.
Cheers, Bill. Take care.
Good to be with everyone.